I just pulled this differential, or rear differential, out of my Ford T-Bird. It's got a noisy bearing in it, so I thought I'd pull her apart and change the bearings in it, have a look at things. Just pulled it out. And pull the back cover off it. And before I pulled the caps off, I marked them. I already actually did put a mark there. Just took a little punch. Couple mark there. Another one there. Two little ones out there. Caps marked, so I'll put the caps back in the same place. I'll take my dial gauge and I'll check the backlash before I take it apart. And hopefully it'll be in the same position when I get it back together. Put this so it's parallel to the gear. Put a little bit of load on it. Put it to 0. Can move the tooth back and forth now. Now we check the backlash of the gear. It's going 13 to 14 times. So that's how much movement's between the pinion gear and the ring gear. So when we put it back together, that's the number we need to remember, because we want to put the clearances the same. It wasn't making any noise or anything, so it was just a bearing noise, a howling noise, so somewhere in there's a bad bearing. Okay, we can take this off. Take the caps off. It's hard on the teeth of your ratchet. If you want to hammer on something, hammer on a wrench, it's much better. You are using air impact. Zap them off like nothing. Alright, how are we going to get this out? There's a splitter that goes in these holes. You crank it out and it splits you should put a dial indicator, split the case about 15 thou, but I don't have one of them, so I'm going to try putting a wrench on here, cranking over the pinion and see if that'll work. Okay, put a 3/4 inch wrench on the ring gear nut, and I got a wrench on the pinion, and I'm going to see if this will walk it out of there. Very easy, eh? Oh, it's off of the pinion gear now. Have to pry it out. Alright, here's a heel bar. We'll just give it a little pull. That one's ready to go. Make sure we don't drop it on the floor. That'd be bad. There. And she's out of there. Alright. Here's the gear. And we can check the rest of the bearings now. Actually, I think you can probably hear how noisy the pinion bearings were. So I'll have to pull the nut off and get those bearings out of there. Put some new ones in there, new seals. Should be good to go. We'll put a little mark on the end of the bolt or end of the pinion shaft and the nut. So when we put it on, we'll over tighten it or untighten it. Just shove something in the hole here to use as a lever. This noise was kind of Well, like a bearing noise, a growling noise when you're driving. To diagnose it, I wanted to make sure it wasn't a side gear or wheel bearing, so I lift up one wheel and put the car in gear and spin it. The noise was the same. Put that wheel back on the ground, lift the other wheel, noise was the same. So that meant it wasn't in the differential side gear bearings or wheel bearings, so the only thing left was the pinion bearings. So that's why we went straight to the pinion bearing. So here I'm back with my puller, 3-jaw puller. Whoops. Tighter than I thought. Whoa. There it goes. Getting easy now. There we go. Look at that, the seal came right out with it. Put a new seal in there. 2-part seal. See the other part of it in there. I'll pull this out of here. And there's the problem. You can actually feel the roughness of the bearings with your finger there. They're all pitted. So she needs a new bearing. Here's this thrust sleeve right here, or the crush sleeve I should say. And when you put a new one in, that crushes and puts preload on the bearing here. So we'll have to go get some new bearings. Slip her back together. Tomorrow she'll run. And just knock the bearings out of this. There's a shim in there I don't want to lose. I can just try a bigger hammer here. Oh. Yeah. There's the shim. I guess I need a new bearing there. That one's worse than the other one. It's really, really galled. Have a look at it there. You can really see the galling. This car sat for a couple of years. I'm thinking it probably got some rust on it, and then the rust started eating it. Bearings are done for sure. There's my spacer, seal, bearing. Knock the races out, and we're done. Actually, I'll knock that race out the same direction. There we go. We're done. Here's a close-up view of this bearing. You can see the pitting in it. It's pretty bad. Stellar race of the bearing. That's what the poor little rollers were running on. Chomping away there. Okay, went down and picked up some new bearings and this little bearing puller. It's not quite big enough, but it's the biggest one that I could find in town today. So it's 2 halves and it slides underneath the bearing, and there's a little strong bar at the top. Here we go, sorry. A little strong bar at the top, and I just put a socket in between them, little spacer, and I'm going to tighten that up and pull that bearing off. I've already done it onto the other shaft here. Put a new bearing on here. I just pulled it off, and I used my punch and hammered it back on there. Another thing you can do to change these bearings is go throw it in the oven, warm up the oven to about 400 degrees, warm up the bearing, and it should just slide right on there without any hammering at all. Just set it into place, tap it into place, and when it cools off it'll be nice and tight. So right now we're going to see if we can pull this bearing off of the shaft. But this center bolt can use for pulling, but this isn't a very strong one. It's pretty coarse, so I'm going to use these 2 bolts to pull it in and see if I can pull that bearing off. Here we go. A little tough one here. I just pulling the bearing cage yet. Oh yeah. So much for that bearing puller. I guess it wasn't really that strong a bearing puller after all. Have to think of something different. That's what a deal is. Alright, 3rd attempt. I get the same little bearing puller on, and I got my little snap-on puller on the top here, so I know that won't break, but it might end up bending these bolts. We'll see what happens. If this doesn't work, we're going to have to cut the bearing cage and maybe cut the bearing off too. We'll get her off though. Don't like that. I guess we should call this take 4. We're breaking out the big stuff now. I went and got my impact. Now we'll see. Something either goes or she breaks. That was one tight bearing. See that it's been galling there. It's starting to come apart alright. It wouldn't have lasted much longer. There you can see it. See, it's starting to gall. That's the inner race too, so. Okay, I'll flip it over and take the other side off the same way. Okay. What's the chance of it coming off easy? Again, the puller is just a little bit too small, one size too small for the job. Therein lies most of the problems here we're having, I think. I think we just go straight to the socket on this puppy. Even. Here we go. new bearing, and we'll do the hammer method. I got a big brass drift here. We'll just hammer on this until we get it started, and then we'll use the punch to finish it off. A little bit more to go. Won't get it with that, so we'll use a punch. I don't know if I'll be able to do it with this one or not. Oh, that sounded different. Yeah, she's there, the solid hit. The little brass guys out of there, little pieces. Alright, we'll flip it over to the other side. I think this will work much better. There we go. That's it. Nice and smooth. Next we got to put the new bearing race, the outer race in here. We pounded the old one out yesterday and last night, so tonight we're gonna put the new bearing race in there. There's the new race. Nice and shiny. A little bit different than the old one. We'll just tap them in there till it seats. That's as far as I can hammer with that, so I'll use the old bearing. I'll just set that on top of it and use that. It's going in now. There we go. Solid. hard on the ears. So much for the ringing ears. Makes a ring. Here we go. I'll flip it over and do the other side. Alright, same thing as the other thing, other side. Smaller bearing in this front pinion bearing. So, new bearing, nice greasy. We'll just drive that in. Actually, I think I'll use the old race to drive that in there with. Be nice thing to use on that. That'll work well. Always make sure you got it started nice and straight. Almost there. Gotta make sure you don't drive this one in too tight so it's stuck. Sometimes it's hard to get out again. There we go. That's it. Solid. Alright, we got it back in the vise here. And new pinion, or the pinion with the new bearing on it. It's got grease on it from the factory. Here's the new crush sleeve. This is the guy that crushes to give enough preload so that you see the two tapered bearings. This bearing goes this way. And when you tighten them on the races, this is what keeps them from getting too tight. So this little guy here actually gets squished, so we're going to use the impact and tighten it down carefully and watch that we don't over preload it, and that will be that. Remember to shim. And of course, the yoke, or the flange. And the drive shaft bolts right on this piece. You can see the marks on the drive shaft. We'll set that on there. I'm going to put it on without the seal, and then I'm going to check the preload, and then I'll mark the shaft. I'll take it off, put the seal in, and then we'll finish installing it. Alright, job made easy now. Those crush sleeves in there are actually quite hard to crush, and half-inch impact, a good impact will just take them down like nothing, and you can really over torque them in a hurry. So gotta be very careful when you get to the critical stage when you're starting to get preload. Otherwise you have to bolt this flange down to a vise somewhere and use a big wrench. You'd be amazed how much torque it takes to start to collapse that. See how much play I got? It's starting to collapse it now. have to go turn my air compressor on, so we'll just take a little break while I build up the air. So there's no slack in it. When you spin it, it doesn't spin anymore. It's actually a fair amount of tension on there. Stops as soon as you know, there's preload on the bearings. The bearings have oil on them, so that's pretty good. We're going to take this apart now. I'm going to mark this very carefully so we have a reference point. We'll take it apart, put the seal in, and put it together for the final time. So we just started the seal there, put the bearing and the washer in there to make sure it's in the spot. And we're just going to use the old bearing race to be careful when you're putting this in that you keep it going in straight. Or you can damage the new seal. You don't want to do that. All right. Now we put some grease in that new seal. Keep the dirt out of it and help it wear in so it doesn't tear itself to pieces. In goes the bearings. I'll put a little bit of fresh oil on the bearings before I start. Now all I have to do is tighten it up to the mark that I forgot to put on. Okay, it's time to slip the rain gear in there. Let's see how we can do. Alright, let's see if we can just tap this into place. This nice little brass strip. Sounds like it. I like it. This one has the one notch on it, and this one has the 2 notches on it. We can hurry it up a little bit. Well, that sounds a whole bunch different than it did, eh? Nice and quiet now. Not roar, roar. Okay, I'm gonna go have to find some torque specs for these bolts. And we'll check the end play, back play, we'll check the gear pattern. And we'll put it back in the car. Okay, I looked up the torque for these bolts. They're 70 to 85. And the backlash for the gear between the pinion and the ring is 8 to 15. So I'll just torque these down. 1, 2, 'There we go. Okay, check the backlash. Set it at 0. So 13 thou. So 8 to 15, so perfect on the backlash. So we're good with that. So if we could check the gear pattern and get some paste on there. We'll check the gear pattern, and I'm sure it's okay anyhow because we didn't change anything but the bearings. The backlash is pretty much the same as when we took it apart, so we didn't change anything there. That kind of proves that everything's still in the same place. And we'll slip her back together tomorrow and fire it up. That's it. Here's a picture of the bearings we just took out of that rear end. You can see that this one here is really coming apart. Big hunk out of the center of it. The bearings are really, really rough and pitted. They weren't much longer for the world. Big holes, hunks in the bottom, missing. There's the inner race. As you can see, it was really coming apart too. Get a good picture of it here. There we go. There you go. There you can see how chewed up it was there. On the race surface, this is the outer race of that same bearing. It was ready to permanently fail. Look at this here. That must have been where the rust started. Definitely it was a breakdown of lubrication between the two metal parts. So there you go, that's a bad bearing. Here's the other one here. It's the race of the big end of the pinion. Not nearly as bad, a lot of material went through it for sure. It's coming apart too, but not like the front end. The side bearings are starting to go too. There's debris going through them. The rollers were the worst part. Alright, there's a couple of bad bearings that were making all the noise in that bad rear end.